There's something written into the blood of nearly 1 billion people that shouldn't, by the normal rules of evolution, still exist. It's not an illness, it's not damage, it's an absence, a single missing protein, and it shows up in roughly 15% of humanity. For most of the 20th century, doctors knew this trait was dangerous, knew it clustered strangely around the globe, and had almost no idea why. Ancient DNA has finally started answering the question. The real story isn't aliens, and it isn't lost continents. It's colder, harder, and far more human than that. In 1940, immunologists Karl Landsteiner and Alexander Wiener were studying blood using rhesus monkeys as part of their experiments. They noticed something odd. When they exposed human blood samples to certain antibodies, most reacted as expected, but a minority showed nothing at all. A protein that should have been there simply wasn't. They named it the rhesus, or Rh, factor. Carry the protein, you're Rh positive. Lack it, you're Rh negative. Overnight, humanity split into 2 blood categories, and the medical fallout was immediate. When an Rh negative mother carries an Rh positive baby, her immune system can eventually recognize the fetus's blood as an invader and attack it. Before doctors understood this, the resulting condition, hemolytic disease of the newborn, quietly killed enormous numbers of infants, generation after generation, with no explanation. It wasn't until 1968, with the introduction of the RhoGAM injection, that the condition became preventable. Tucked between the mountains of northern Spain and southwest France lived the Basque people, speakers of Euskara, a language so unrelated to anything else on Earth that linguists simply call it an isolate. Their blood is just as strange. Global Rh negative rates hover around 15%. Among the Basques, the number climbs past 35%, by far the highest concentration on the planet. Modern ancient DNA work, including research associated with Harvard geneticist David Reich, points to why Basque ancestry traces in an almost unbroken line back to Ice Age Europe. When farming communities migrated in from the Near East roughly 7,000 years ago and genetically reshaped nearly the entire continent, the Basque region was barely touched. They remained, essentially, a living pocket of pre-agricultural Europe, descendants of hunter-gatherers who weathered the glaciers in Iberian shelter zones. Even Ötzi, the 5,300-year-old mummy pulled from an alpine glacier in 1991, carried genetic markers linking him to that same deep-rooted European lineage, a frozen snapshot of the population the Basques descend from. When scientists tried to plot Rh-negative frequency against known human migration routes, the pattern fell apart. Western Europe runs 15 to 30%, spiking hard in Ireland, Scotland, and Basque Country. North African Berber groups sit around 10 to 20%. Some Jewish and Arab communities in Western Asia reach as high as 25%. Then, crossing the Urals into Asia, the numbers essentially vanish, under 1% in China and Japan, and below 0.3% across sub-Saharan Africa. And then come the numbers that break the model entirely. The Blackfoot and Blood tribes of North America show Rh negative rates near 10%, despite descending, according to standard migration theory, from populations that crossed over through northeastern Asia, a region where the trait is almost non-existent. One theory gaining traction: the hotspots trace old coastlines, not migration corridors. From North Africa to the Basque Coast, to the Hebrides, to isolated communities in the Americas, the pattern hugs the sea. After the Ice Age ended, oceans rose over 400 feet, drowning coastal regions. Doggerland, Sundaland, Beringia, where people had lived for thousands of years. The current map of Rh-negative blood may simply be tracing what the flooding left behind. Here's the real puzzle. A trait that reliably contributes to infant mortality should be stamped out by natural selection within a handful of generations. Evolution doesn't tend to preserve costly mutations without a reason. Yet in the Basque Country, where over a third of the population carries it, the trait didn't just survive, it thrived. That means something was balancing the scales, some survival advantage strong enough to offset the losses. One candidate, Toxoplasma gondii, a common parasite that alters neurological function in roughly a third of people infected worldwide today. Some research suggests Rh-negative individuals may be less neurologically affected by it, a meaningful edge for a Paleolithic hunter who needed sharp reflexes. Another candidate, the Black Death. Between 1346 and 1353, plague killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people. Some researchers have noted that regions with elevated Rh-negative frequencies appear to have fared somewhat better, hinting that the trait may have offered a survival edge during that catastrophe too. Long before genetics existed as a science, European nobility were already fixated on something they couldn't name. They called it blue blood, a term born in medieval Spain, describing the pale skin of aristocrats through which their veins showed distinctly blue. To them, it signified an unbroken, pure lineage. Modern researchers now wonder if these dynasties were unintentionally concentrating a genuinely rare blood trait through generations of strategic intermarriage. DNA studies of Egyptian royal mummies confirm heavy inbreeding within ruling families. In Europe, the Habsburgs, Tudors, and Bourbons intermarried with a persistence that unsettled even their own contemporaries, nominally to protect political power, but with the side effect of concentrating unusual genetics across centuries. In a world with no concept of germ theory, a family that quietly resisted diseases devastating everyone else might easily have looked touched by something divine. It's a strange thought. The divine right of kings may have had a biological footnote nobody at the time could see. Of course, that same intense inbreeding eventually turned against these families. Hemophilia and other hereditary conditions spread through royal bloodlines that had simply become too narrow to stay healthy. The story doesn't stop with disease resistance. Researchers studying modern Rh-negative populations have noticed a few recurring, if subtle, patterns. The MC1R gene variant tied to red hair shows up more frequently in some Rh-negative populations, particularly in Ireland and Scotland, where both traits cluster together at elevated rates, a pairing consistent enough that it's drawn real scientific interest. Some studies have also pointed to subtler neurological differences, heightened sensitivity to shifts in weather, light, or social tension among Rh-negative carriers, with a few researchers proposing that differences in the blood-brain barrier could affect how external stimuli are processed. For a small group navigating real physical danger every day, that kind of heightened awareness wouldn't have been a quirk. It would have been a survival tool. Every scientific mystery eventually attracts theories that rush in to fill the gap, and Rh-negative blood has collected more than its share. There's the alien hybrid theory, the idea that Rh-negative people descend from extraterrestrial engineering, supposedly explaining why Rh-negative mothers' bodies reject Rh-positive babies. There's an Atlantis-flavored version, casting scattered Rh-negative populations as remnants of a lost civilization. In Japan, blood type already carries heavy cultural weight, and Rh-negative individuals are sometimes treated as inherently different or mysterious. The actual science is less fantastical, and honestly, more impressive. Ancient DNA now dates the origin of the Rh-negative mutation to somewhere between 25,000 and 35,000 years ago, squarely inside the last ice age, when small, isolated human groups across Europe, North Africa, and the Caucasus were fighting starvation and extinction. It wasn't engineered. It wasn't inherited from visitors. It was a single gene, RhD, switching off in a population already living on the edge. The lost civilizations aren't myth either. They're just underwater. Doggerland under the North Sea, Sundaland in Southeast Asia. Real, fertile, inhabited regions swallowed by rising seas after the glaciers melted. The survivors moved to higher ground and to coastlines, and that's precisely where the genetic hotspots sit today. This isn't ancient history. It's an active medical reality. Just 7% of people worldwide carry O-negative blood, the universal donor-type hospitals depend on in emergencies when there's no time to test. Every trauma center and disaster response unit runs on O-negative reserves that blood banks constantly warn are dangerously low. The cost hasn't disappeared either. The World Health Organization estimates roughly 100,000 newborns still die each year from untreated Rh incompatibility in places where RhoGAM isn't accessible, even though the treatment has existed since 1968. And the trait keeps surfacing in new research. A study published during the COVID-19 pandemic suggested R-negative individuals may have faced a somewhat lower risk of severe illness, a possible echo of the same resistance that may have helped their ancestors survive the Black Death centuries earlier. Rh-negative blood isn't a leftover curiosity. It's a living record of an ice age, of plagues survived, of coastlines that no longer exist, written into the most personal place imaginable. Your blood type isn't just a lab result. It's a story still being told.